Podcast. My name is Ben, your host, and today we have the founder of finance.vote, Dr. Nick Almond. What's going on, Doc?
Hi, Ben. Nice to meet you, man.
Hey, you too, man. Really appreciate you coming on the show today. So I know you guys are doing some really cool things over at finance.vote. Would love to really understand before we really dive into the technical side, dive into like what's going on, what y'all are solving, pain points. Would love to just learn more about you and your own personal history and how you really got to where you are today.
Cool, man. Sure. So I'm a physicist by background. So I spent 10 years in physics, ended up doing a PhD in physics, which is why I'm sort of often known as Dr. Nick. So my PhD ended up focusing on biological molecules and how they interacted with surfaces, and it all got very experimental and means you just sit in dark labs a lot.
Real social activity, it seems.
Exactly, yeah. So I kind of got I got a little bit sort of fed up of sitting in dark labs, twiddling knobs, repeating experiments. So I ended up trying to maneuver myself more into education, where I went out and I realized this is an important thing to do. So I wanted more physicists, more scientists. So went into education, specialized in learning theory. Got a job as a lecturer, as a mathematician. So teaching maths students, which is where I discovered Bitcoin, because one of my courses was cryptography. And I sort of carried on the education thing, ended up working in governance research eventually. So I ended up sort of designing institutional governance processes at large institutions, large universities, and they largely work a bit like DAOs. So I was trying to organize, thousands of people to work on things together and share their knowledge and collaborate and reach consensus around the same time as the DAO happened on Ethereum. So in about 2016, I became completely obsessed with crypto. I'd kind of heard about it up to that point. But yeah, spent the last 5 or 6 years just researching it completely, and then ended up taking a job at the London College of Fashion, believe it or not, and that's how I ended up in London. And throughout that whole time, I set up some courses in blockchain and emerging technology, and but finally sort of escaped academia after about 18, 19 years to set up a crypto startup, which is finance.vote, which started in 2020.
Oh, so cool. Okay, let's dive in. So early on, you're on the math side. You literally are teaching a course on cryptography. I feel like 0.00001% of people who are in crypto understand anything about cryptography.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain how important it actually is to everything that's going on in the crypto world, and like what do we need to know about the cryptography side that's relevant to the crypto
It's a really good
financial
question.
side?
I think it's about it's fundamentally about security. So it's about the cryptography creates the primitives, the building blocks for how this all works. And so when I would start my courses going right back into number theory and like how the universe likes numbers. It's actually a Julian Assange quote. It's like the secret to our problems is that the universe loves mathematics. And it turns out that you can use numbers and manipulate numbers to protect information. So you can make mathematical equations where it's really easy to run one way, very, very difficult to run the other. And that allows us to encode information that you can have publicly on the internet, but no one can see unless you hold the key. And that's really crypto used to be just cryptography when people would say crypto. And in fact, there's many cryptographers who are very annoyed about this, that we've kind of overtaken the word. But yeah, cryptography is the fundamental root to all of this stuff. And it kind of uses mathematics to be able to encode information so that others on the internet can't break it open without your permission. So really, in terms of what people really need to know about it, other than it's really important, is I guess you need to understand that if if you lose your key, it's all over. It's like they're unbreakable. We're working right at these cryptographic primitives now. So you're working like a cryptographer, which means you can't lose your passwords and you have to be very, very careful. It's not like a Web 2 app. You're actually operating like a cryptographer, sending encoded messages. So you just have to treat it with respect and kind of know that you're doing something very, very serious. It's not something to play around with. Which is funny because we're talking about crypto gaming, of course. But yeah, to look after your passwords is the number one, because you are on your own, really.
So for somebody, and one of the angle I kind of want to ask this from is like, I want to give people the ability to create their own edge in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like everybody has to have an edge in some way, shape, or form. So how much would it help somebody to go back and learn about cryptography and study? Like, I've done a little bit of my own digging into it. Just found like some open source courses from like Stanford or something. So like the basics of like, you have a message, pre-encryption, and then you have your encryption key. It's just the fundamentals, like sending information from one side to the other without somebody being able to attack that and gain access to the information that you don't want them to have. So there's like the message on one side, the encryption, and then that sends on the other side like gobbledygook that if you then have the same key, you can then decrypt it. And so like fundamentally, like, but how much should we try to learn about that stuff and understand and dig in and like understand the difference between stream ciphers or perfect secrecy or, zero knowledge and different things like that? Like, where should we be putting our efforts?
I would say go as deep as you're interested in. I think it's worth really understanding proof of work and how Bitcoin works. I would go into that, understand how the SHA-256 algorithm works, understand how the mining algorithms work. It's this kind of probabilistic game. So people are searching a number space, essentially. So they're looking for the lowest number that falls within this target. And I think that maps to gaming in an interesting way, because essentially the Bitcoin mining game is a game. It's like a lottery game that everyone is playing in this adversarial sort of battleground. And I think it's worth really getting into understanding Bitcoin on a fundamental level to try and understand how this is the basis of a lot of crypto economics. So if you can understand how Bitcoin mining works, I think a lot of the same principles will carry through into play-to-earn token economics. A lot of it will be probabilistic. So there's like this notion of you'll earn points that increase your probability of winning. And they'll have something, a lot of the primitives will be a little bit like the Bitcoin mining game. So I think a good edge will be really try to understand proof of work and Bitcoin. And if you're interested in sort of migrating across the L2s and getting into, crossing bridges, I think one of the biggest edges you can get is understanding the risks of when things stop being trustless, right? So I try to stay away from bridges as much as possible because I don't trust them, right? We built a bridge on our project and just tried to shield it as much as possible from the world because it's a centralized server. So understanding where the keys are in a system, understanding where the risk is. So if there's a centralized computer here with all the money stored in it, and there's one guy with a key, you really need to trust that guy to not run away with all the funds, or you really need to trust the quality of the code, which is like we saw with the wormhole hack, I think last week or so. So these are real, where there's failure trust points is normally where the cryptography gets weak, where the trust gets weak. So understanding where the weakness is in the system is a real edge, because you don't trust those points in the system with too much of your own money.
Oh, that's so smart. So you're basically saying if you can understand some of the math behind this, the different mechanisms that are powering the platforms that everything's happening on, then from a risk mitigation standpoint, you will know, or you'll have a much better understanding of where can I get screwed, where
Yeah,
can I get wrecked, and then that gives you an edge, because it doesn't matter how much money you can make or generate. If you lose it all, you lose it all. Whether
yes,
you lose,
absolutely.
whether your net worth is $10 or $10 million, if you lose 100% of that, you're still at zero at the end of the day. Okay, that's
Absolutely.
brilliant.
So
And
yeah,
so, okay, go ahead.
yeah, just to kind of highlight, concentrate on trust models. Who are you trusting? Where are the keys? And are you over trusting a bit of code or a person even?
Oh, that's phenomenal. So to really start this whole journey of discovery, I kind of want to give people a launch pad, and then I want to move on to the next topic. Just
Hmm.
so open the wormhole, all pun intended, and then then people can kind of dive in from there. Where do you start with that? I know where I started. I spoke on that earlier, but like, how would you, somebody who actually is building stuff to teach other people this, where would you suggest people go to begin their research journey in that particular line of thinking?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think starting with the kind of primitives of the thing. So what are the building blocks? So is there a multi-sig, for example, that controls these things? So you can think of multi-sigs are a start of the decentralization process. So sometimes there's a smart contract system where there's a management key. So a management key that can essentially take all the funds out of it on its own. You can replace one of them or have the key controlled by a multi-sig, which means you might have, say, 2 of 3 people need to reach consensus before they can take the funds out. So understanding multi-sigs is a good way to go and find out where they are in the system. So get used to reading the technical documentation on these things and asking the team sort of tough questions about who are the multi-sig signers, how many are on the multi-sig. The more signers on the multi-sig, the less trust there is. And if you know they're independent people, that's important. And I would say, it's not really feasible for most people to start learning Solidity and start being able to read contracts independently. But what you can ask projects is, where is the trust in the system? Where are the multi-sigs? If there are multi-sigs, how trustless is it? And see what their answers are. If they can't really answer confidently, then there's probably a little bit of a problem there. So asking hard questions around where the trust is, who's controlling the funds, and audits don't necessarily even solve the problem either. Just because there's been an audit doesn't mean, although audit reports are a good thing to look at as that research point. But yeah, I think one of the best places to research is talking to people in Discords, in their Telegram groups, talking to the founders. I spent last 18 months in one of these groups asking any question that anyone wants to come along and ask. And that really is the best way, I think, talking and learning with people, reading the documentation, asking questions.
I love that. I love that. So moving from the cryptography side into governance, that to me is a very interesting. I don't know if it's a jump necessarily, but like, what was that actual path? I know you kind of talked about it a little bit, but like, how did you go from like math, cryptography, trust into governance?
Yeah. So the course I was teaching essentially people who are going to be maths teachers, right? So the course was kind of fused with how to teach maths to other people. So I would teach them the maths and then teach them how to teach it to other people. And eventually that moved me into running courses on so as you kind of move through the academic ladder, if you like, you end up in these management positions where
Like
you
train
end
the
up,
trainer type thing.
yeah. So I ended up training thousands of teachers eventually. And when you start dealing with large volumes of people, you have to end up building governance systems to make sure everyone does their job properly, and standards are met and so on. I was quite good at that. So I ended up sort of moving up the sort of management ranks. And eventually, when you get to the top, you end up designing committee structures and governance designs. And then eventually I started to design new governance designs that hadn't sort of really been designed before. And then you have to get into the governance theory and how to organize people at scale. So that was kind of the trajectory. Eventually, you kind of fall up the management ladder enough, you end up at governance. That's the end game for all managerial or processes where you're dealing with large amounts of people.
Oh, this is fascinating. Okay, that makes so much sense. As a quick side note, is there a thread here to dig more into the importance of governance tokens as a function of where the logical conclusion of this conversation could go? Because if you're saying as you move up in an organization, you eventually hit governance,
Yeah.
and now people can jump straight to governance. Okay, now we're kind of getting into the DAO thing. Okay, yeah, I see the thread. Okay, so in order to then get us to the DAO part, before we get there, from what you learned, starting where you started and then working all the way up to that governance position, what were some of the things that you learned? Some of the most important principles of governance, like what works the best at the various stages that you were at?
Yeah, really good question. I would say, and a lot of this is carried through to my thinking now, and I think it maps to things like DAOs. I think people who feel like they are empowered, so people who feel like they have the potential to change something or influence a institution, a company, or a DAO, are more likely to do it. So people need to feel like they have the potential to make a change in order to care about the system itself. So people feeling like they're listened to, but actually building paths so they can actually materially change something. So one of the most successful things you can do is say, here's how you can change the system. Here's how you can make some good suggestions and make a change. And then when anyone steps up and takes that, is to champion those people and say, hey, this is brilliant. And then that encourages more people to do it. I guess one of the other things is leading by example. So if you want other people to behave in a certain way, to follow your lead, you have to do it yourself. You have to say, if people won't follow you unless you're willing to do it. So you need to step up and do the work and show people, look, I'm doing it, which is, you can't just expect other people to follow you without doing it yourself. But yeah, and just being clear and fair. People don't like being treated in a way that as soon as people don't feel like things are fair, it all goes badly very, very quickly. So it's got to feel fair. It's got to feel transparent. And I think a lot of that is amplified in DAOs, actually, to where we're getting now. Those principles matter more even in this space.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when you're talking about, I kind of want to break down these things, and anybody that's building anything in Web3, pay attention, because this is super important. I think you're getting some alpha here that's going to be very, very important in the next couple of decades, if not much later on. So pay attention to this stuff. But if you could kind of break down for us, like, how do you do these things? For example, the first point that you mentioned of having people have the feeling of being able to change something, or maybe beyond the feeling of, I have the power to actually make meaningful change in this thing that I care about, and there's a path to get there. Like, maybe we could go back through the things you just said and talk about how to build those into something, both from the ground up, if it's yours, and then if it's not yours, but you care about it and you want to build it into, as you're flying the plane, making repairs as you're flying the plane.
Yeah. So it's kind of like finding wins. So like examples where this has happened. So working very personally with some people. So I'm I'll lens it into DAOs and like examples of how, if you are setting up a DAO, and you should talk to us if you are, but if you want to do this, then showing you'll have a community, and then there's a lot of people coming in who won't necessarily feel like they are in a position to actually change the project or get involved, or find that person who's showing an interest and nurture that interest, support that one person all the way through to making a real change, and then celebrate that person and show all the other people that it's possible, and then you'll get a crowd. You can it creates a kind of snowball effect, right? Where so caring about individuals, and so you might even in a probably some people in a Discord. It's quite strange moving from an institutional setting to a crypto setting where you take a personal sort of connection with an avatar. It's some pseudonymous individual, and caring about them and showing them like, hey, come, they've shown an interest, nurture it, give them opportunities to be able to rise up and make a change, and celebrate them when they do.
So it only takes one.
It just takes one. You can get one person, elevate them to the point where, so we've had some really visible wins where we have a role we call a DAO leader, and all of our DAO leaders have been recruited directly from the community. So they're people who turned up in our Discord, in our Telegram, and we now employ them full time. They work with us full time, and people have seen that happen. They were in the groups where these people have been elevated to a position of real power in our DAO. And yeah, so creating spaces for people to move into, and being fair about it as much as possible. Very difficult to scale, but it's one of those things where all of the people who are a big part of finance.vote now, we've just got there by being cool with them and being welcoming and making them feel like they can step up and do it.
So let's say it's a project where maybe they don't have as many resources, like they're trying to bootstrap it, but they still have people who are engaged, and they still want to elevate them and just say thank you, I guess, in a way that's meaningful. What would be some ways, maybe you can't take them from, okay, they're just a contributor online, and now they're working for you full time, but maybe maybe you can celebrate them on social media, or give them, help promote them on your platform or something. Like, what are some other ways that more cash-strapped projects can still take advantage of this idea?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about crypto projects is that sometimes you might be cash strapped now, but you have tokens that might be worth valuable in the future. So you have a kind of reserve of tokens. So be quite liberal with your token supply, perhaps. So give out your tokens, or maybe your NFTs. So things like free mints of NFTs, vested allocations of tokens is a great way to do it. Direct financial incentives are always the best ones, but there are ways in which you can, so things like role structures. So you can have a kind of 5-tier role system that people can move towards and up through the system, that gives them elevated rights in the DAO, for example, or in the Discord even. And people will do it for those reasons. They'll do it for higher positions in leaderboards, or just social validation within the DAO. But yeah, I think it helps when you can do the monetary incentive, and it doesn't mean it, like pre-release tokens are a great way to do it. They're a great way to align incentives. So you might be pre-funding pre-token release, but holding pre-release tokens and then being successful in the future is still the best way to make it in crypto, I think.
I love that. One of the sentiments that actually a couple of the guests who have been on the show have said that I really love is that whenever you do issue a token of some sort, whether it be fungible, non-fungible, you are essentially indebting yourself to your community.
Yes.
And I actually really like that idea because you're then putting your reputation and yourself and your project on the line, saying, I will deliver something to you because you are accepting this token as something of value from me in exchange for whatever it is that you're doing, whether it be a service or directly cash or, whatever it is. But that idea of, okay, you're trusting me with whatever it is that you're giving in exchange for this token, and now I can go to work for you forever. I love that
Yeah.
idea. I absolutely
Yes.
love that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a big fan of token economics. I think it's a radically new field, and it's going to be one of the biggest fields in economics in about 10 years' time. I think people will realize that tokenized assets allow you to generate alignment in communities that has not been possible before, because we've not
Of
been able
course.
to exchange value on the internet quite this way before. So yeah, I like that framing of it's almost like a debt to the community to realize the vision of the project. And that's why you have to be so careful with that. You can trust these people to I mean, you shouldn't have to trust them. This is the thing. So you can make sure that they are taking on that debt, and it is like that, but make sure they can't release more tokens into the market than they've said they're going to over time. So one of the things that we've developed is trustless vesting systems. So systems that make sure the tokens only come out on a schedule that they're supposed to, rather than you having to take the word of that person who set up the project to honor that code that was set essentially when they exchanged the tokens. Because many of these projects will fail. And normally when times get a little bit hard, that's when the trust models fail. And if there's money floating around in the market that they can take out, they probably will. So yeah, it is like a debt, but you should not. The people in these projects might feel trustworthy, but you should really try and trust the code as much as possible.
That makes a ton of sense. And that just kind of goes back to like, do your own research, make sure you understand what you're actually getting yourself into. Obviously, if you just want to, you're trying to throw a Hail Mary and you're throwing in, some money that you definitely expect to lose, like by all means, go forth and
Yeah.
prosper. But I mean, when we're talking about investing our time into an organization, like that to me is even more precious than however many dollars, you want to, or however many units of whatever currency you want to play with. So it gets very important very quickly in my eyes to really understand these concepts that you're talking about. So let's kind of move now into the startup, and let's talk about what you've been building. And then I do actually want to circle back to this idea of like like a tokenomic economist, a tokenomist, whatever that word,
Token
whatever that.
economist.
Yeah, yeah. I was trying to meld it in a cool way, but so I want to come back to that. But like, let's talk about finance.vote. Like, at what point did you say, okay, I got to go do my own thing. I got to get into the startup world,
Mm.
and of all the different things that you were doing, why this? Why now?
Yeah, I think for many years I almost jumped in kind of 2018, which would have been a terrible idea, because there was a moment where kind of late bull run after everything's been super, prices have gone super high, everything's gone up 10x plus. And then everyone thinks, I want to leave my job and go into crypto. And I was one of them. And it was my girlfriend, now wife, who stopped me, just like, hey, take your time on this, make sure you don't jump too early. And thankfully I didn't. It would have been an absolute disaster. And then I spent 2 more years researching, getting good at crypto, designing token models for people who wanted to do crypto startups and so on. So in my spare time, really, I was teaching. I was an associate dean, day job, and hanging around with crypto people at night and designing token systems and so on. And then DeFi summer happened in 2020, which was the first time the market was really dead for like many years. For the bottom of the 2019 sort of bear market, no one was around anymore. No one cared about tokens. Literally, there was about half a dozen people in the world who cared about DAOs. And yeah, so it got really, really quiet. And then DeFi summer really booted everything back up again, and people wanted tokens again. And throughout this period, I'd been, met quite a few people in crypto, been to a few international crypto conferences, and yeah, a couple of friends of mine said, "Hey, why don't you try and do something, in crypto now? It's that time." So we started out as a kind of fairly DeFi heavy project. My goal was to get into governance design and DAOs, but really at that time, no one really cared about DAOs. So finance.vote started as a voting based, and that was the governance link, but it was a prediction market type setup, which had DeFi and liquidity mining kind of primitives built into it. And so we managed to find some financing. Happened strikingly quickly, actually. It was just kind of a luck-based thing. We hit the right sort of peak in that market, and we set up, and I managed to find the people who I'd built connections with over a few years, and managed to chase down one of the best smart contracts engineers in the world. He's a good friend of mine, who's my co-founder now. And yeah, I sort of put the calls in and said, let's go. And that's what we did. And we built a prediction market system that essentially pays people. It was actually, I think it might have been one of the first play to earn games, because the game was you vote on essentially the order of a list of tokens. So we give you a basket of tokens, and you vote on their future performance. So you create a list of which ones you think are the best. And then we use chain link oracles to find out what the prices of those were over time. And then if you win, you get paid out from the reserve tokens. And that was the game. That's where we started out in prediction markets, and a sort of gamified approach to picking out good tokens. And that's where we started. But yeah, what we discovered was, in launching a project, nothing was there. None of the infrastructure was there for properly launching a token, for vesting things safely, and making sure that token holders didn't have to trust us. So we ended up building all these tools to become a DAO ourselves. And that's what we've ended up with, a kind of suite of DAO tools that we want to start helping other people to use now.
That's awesome. Can you show me or tell me? We can screen share if you want. These tools. I want to see some of the tools, how to use them. Let's dive in here.
Let's see. So yeah, I'll quickly walk through. Some of them are quite difficult to show because you need a live tokens in. I'll walk you through the kind of life cycle of what these tools are, and I might be able to show you some in a minute. Sure. So if you think about when you're launching a project with let's say a token, you might do, let's say, a pre-sale of those tokens. So in order to build out the MVP, for example, you might sell, let's say, 10% of your token supply to investors who believe in you and believe you're going to produce a token model which makes those tokens valuable. And in order to make sure those investors don't sell them all on day one, you need a vesting system. So we built an app called Bank, which trustlessly locks in the token economics, the emission schedules over time. So if you say the team should only get 10% of the tokens emitted to them over 3 years, this system locks that in so it can't ever be changed. So it locks it into a smart contract. That means they can't ever be changed. And we built a version 2 of that product, which now can be used as a DAO payroll mechanism. So we can send tokens to 1 million people with this now. So using what are called Merkle routes. So you've got your tokens locked. The next one is a launching system, which sells your tokens into the market, discovers a price for them. So one of the things I think is important is that the team don't set the listing price, the market does. So that the listing price of the token is determined through an auction, and the money that's raised in that auction goes straight to either a DAO or Uniswap, for example, an AMM, without the team being able to stop it. So that's a kind of trustless launching system. It means that the team and all the investors can't snatch the money out of the pot. So it kind of mitigates the kind of rug pull episodes. And the next sort of thing you need is a liquidity mining system, which is we built a kind of play to earn like liquidity mining game, which I'll try and show you in a minute, actually. So that's called Yield. And so how do I share on this? There you go, share screen.
And we can also, if you want, I know I probably should have asked this beforehand, but we can always do, a follow-up episode or include some additional informations or demos in the description. But let me add this to the stream here, and it's a little bit fuzzy, but I think we'll be good. I think we'll be able to kind of parse through what's going on here.
Yeah, it might be a little bit tricky without connecting my wallet. But yeah, so this is what we call a gamified liquidity mining system. So we've created a game where you earn tokens, and this is a kind of yield curve. So it's a token that pulses. So liquidity mining is a process where you stake your tokens, and you earn more tokens for providing liquidity. And in this case, you earn them on this kind of yield curve, and it recycles. So it goes back to the top of this. So there's like a moment of high emission through to loans every 2 weeks. And then it becomes a game of trying to overtake these slots. If I connected my wallet, I'd be able to show you. But these are little houses. We call them protocol properties. And it's almost like a game of Monopoly, where you can take a slot by paying more than someone else is willing to pay. So we call that resident pool. The other that we've got is called influence. And this is a voting system which allows you to vote using quadratic voting, is one of our things. Cool. So this is a gasless voting system. And this was us deciding, we emit tokens from our treasury every 2 or 3 months to people who've done work for us. And this is us deciding who gets those tokens. So the vote was decided to send them to our voters as voting rewards. Some go to our DAO leaders, some go to our citizens who are our NFT governance holders, some go to our workers, testers, and so on, people who make memes for us. And we think this is an example of an NFT DAO, actually. So these are NFTs.
Sweet.
Yeah, so these are our NFT holders. This one's actually me voting in that. You can see if we sort by who thinks we vote for markets. I didn't think we vote for markets, so I downvoted it. So you can vote, say why you voted that way, and your NFT is like an avatar in the system. So yeah, we think this is a really interesting way to take governance forward in the crypto market. Well, I think NFT governance is the next major sort of point of development in the governance space.
I think so too. And just to kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit, so the NFT is your avatar.
Yeah.
And do you then have a history of how that almost like a reputation for that avatar, where you see this is what I've done, this is what I've voted on, this is essentially my identity online, at least for this particular NFT. Is that kind of the idea of like building a reputation and having like your own personal NFT based or NFT visually represented history?
Yes, exactly. We've called them a few things. We start calling them digital identity tokens, or we're now calling them metaverse identities. But yeah, that's exactly it. They become your in DAOs. You don't necessarily need to tell everyone who you really are, right?
Right.
You can have you can be a Bored Ape or a CryptoPunk or a Pudgy Penguin or whatever, and that NFT can exactly gain reputation. So you can potentially earn more voting power by making good decisions or making good market picks or contributing more to marketing or whatever it is. So, and that's why I think NFT governance is the next major wave in DGov, because people are non-fungible, right?
Right.
Doesn't necessarily make sense that the best decision makers are the token whales. Just because you've got a load of ether doesn't mean that you make good decisions necessarily. You might have just bought ether early.
Right. It should be a
So
meritocracy where the best
exactly,
ideas come to the surface.
precisely. So that's very much what the problems we're trying to solve is to move DAO governance, decentralized governance forward by making it less about purely about money and more about history of participation or quality of decision making.
Oh, that's cool. So how do you actually so okay, quality of participation in your history, that seems like on-chain voting or at least some sort of voting, like understanding the history of the voting is important. But then what
Mm.
about the other activities that that individual participates in? For example, let's say you were trying to give me a score of like, okay, if Ben votes on issue A and that happens to be about DeFi, well, that should be weighted differently than if it's issue B and that's more about crypto gaming,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm going to be more inclined to have a higher quality response. More likely than not, it depends on the specific issue, but more likely than not, I'm going to have a better more quality, meaningful, substantive response in the crypto gaming issue as opposed to like some very niche uh, DeFi thing that I'm just not playing in every day. So like, how do you understand that based on your system? And because it would seem like you could almost scrape the web and understand like what other activities this person is doing, so you would obviously easily be able to connect to me to the Crypto Gaming Institute, and then that so like I think you understand what I'm saying. Like, how do we
Yeah,
take that
totally,
into
man.
account?
So this is a really big thing. I think this was when I really realized this kind of thing was possible. This is where I really went down the rabbit hole. I think this is potentially world changing. I
Yeah,
think it's possible. So I call it informed consensus, right? Which is instead of one person, one vote, you have votes weighted by how much people actually know about something. So
exactly. That's exactly what I'm
that could
talking
be
about.
how governance ends up, right? So this could improve democracy. If, let's say,
Yes.
we ask people decisions based on their demonstrable knowledge about a thing, that could really change the quality of decision making. It's actually
Well,
exactly what we're targeting. Yeah,
it's
exactly that.
it's almost it's almost the most important issue that we're facing as a civilization,
Yeah.
because we're at kind of an inflection point where there's a lot of hostility in the world and there's
Hmm.
a changing world order, and there's also a parallel changing economic system or multiple economic systems, and the very foundation of how we operate as a society is changing in multiple ways. And just namely to to really be specific about it, like there's the US versus China. I'm hoping it doesn't end up being a versus, but two world empires that one's on the in different stages of their own life cycle, that has aftershocks or after effects to the whole world, the tussle of these two great entities. And then also there's like crypto versus the legacy financial model. Then there's like this idea of privacy and wanting to be more secure, which is like blockchain versus like data, or blockchain and data. There's so many different things that are changing so quickly. And then there's AI on top of it. And then there's, so there's so many this could be the tool or the mechanism that we use as humanity to come together to actually have smart people make decisions to move us forward on these very complex and nuanced and incredibly important issues.
I think so. Yeah,
I think so
I love
too.
that you've got this straight away. Yeah, absolutely. It's so the world gets more complex over time, right? Everything is it's a complex adaptive system, sometimes called. It's a complex system. And the more new technology, the more of us there are, the more interconnected we become, the more technology we have. All of these things make the world more complex. And then add in systemic changes like pandemics and climate change and all of these things that can disrupt a system and make it radically different, which means we need to solve problems, sometimes massive existential problems that we've never come across before. So we don't have the governance systems currently in order to be able to deal with those problems, which is what we've seen over the last 2 years, right? It's been a real mess because we've not been able to make good decisions quickly and get the right people making those decisions in positions of power. So we end up with people who don't really know what they're doing, making big decisions, and then they make a mess, and then they cover up those messes, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Exactly.
So yeah, so we need better decision-making tooling. We need better governance tooling. We need the ability to make agile decisions. So large organizations, they don't get much more bigger than governments. The bigger they get, the harder they are to move, the more systemically slow they are, the more inertia they have.
Yes.
So I think DAOs will come in as these really radically agile organizations, potentially using the kind of voting tools we are, where we find extremely skilled people, pay them what they deserve, and give them decision-making powers commensurate with their ability. And I think DAOs will show the world that like radically new decision-making processes can emerge out of things like blockchain and crypto.
I agree completely. And where I think we will see this first is within video games.
Yes,
And
I agree with you, actually.
and I think the reason is because we're going to see the biggest adoption of crypto and blockchain and DAOs come from communities of people playing video games, because the gaming wave is what's going to onboard the next mass of humanity into crypto, blockchain, Web3, blah blah blah, whatever it really is, whatever label you want to. Let's call it the metaverse. It's gonna onboard new people into the metaverse, and we're then going to see how these different tools and ideas and structures and experiments play out within games first. And the reason why that's important is because we get to see potentially life-changing structure and important ideas and concepts being tested in the micro within a specific game. So you have a microcosm of humanity, and then many of those experiments can happen all at the same time throughout all the different games. And then hopefully, as people, we can then extract what we learn from those games and then bring that IRL outside of games. And hopefully, then we can save humanity and get back on track with where we should be going, because there's so many fun things we have yet to do as humanity. Like if we don't kill ourselves first, which is essentially what we're trying to solve for here.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think exactly the same thing. So for example, our yield game that we've created, this works on a crypto economic idea called Harberger taxes, which is based on this fairly esoteric idea of, instead of letting people hold property forever, that you have something called a land value tax, which means that generations, like land, can't be hoarded by people for generations because it costs them money to hold it. And it's written by it was a book written called Radical Markets by a guy called Glenn Whale. Now, this will never be implemented in the real world because the idea of private property is just too sacrosanct, right? It's just you can't. It'd be politically impossible to say someone can buy your house from you if they bid the right amount at any time. But we've built it in the metaverse, and we've got the data out of how this plays out. So we've got like a real economic experiment that can prove that it might be a good way to broker land sales, for example. So I think metaverse land, using Harberger taxes and the kind of system that we've built, will actually influence economic policy. And there'll be MMORPGs that get so big, they need governments. And there'll be DAOs that essentially control the shift of game mechanics. And they're going to need policy decisions and direct democracies. And in all of these decisions, we're going to create new forms of democracy in the metaverse that show that democracy can be better in the real world. So yeah, I actually do think it'll be the gaming world where these experiments will be tried out. It'll be the crypto gaming spaces where we'll try things that you wouldn't be able to try in the real world because the risks are too high.
That's right.
So that's right. I'm completely on the same page on that one.
You know, part of this whole thing makes me smile because it really kind of came in at a time for a lot of people where we've been playing video games our whole lives. And so many people are like, you're wasting your time. And we can finally say, no, we've not been. we have a good reason for having done that. We saw ahead. We really did.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah.
But
no, I think there's understanding. I mean, you said something like the gamers are going to bring everyone into crypto. I completely agree, and they will have that edge because it is game theory that makes these systems work. Understanding game mechanics. And a few years ago, a lot of the kind of real crypto OGs that I knew were into like poker, for example. They understood game mechanics like poker. Now things are moving into the systems are getting a little bit more elaborate, a little bit more complex. And it's the gamers I'm starting to see as the ones who have the edge in the market because they understand how game mechanics work and they understand game systems, game economics. So yeah, I absolutely think a lot of that understanding of game worlds will absolutely map to Web3.
Absolutely. So I know we're coming close to time here, and I want to be very respectful of your time. Obviously, you're tackling an extremely important set of problems in the world, so I want to be very cognizant that time is probably the most important resource you have right now. So just to kind of wrap us up here, what can people be doing right now to better prepare themselves for this future? There are so many different ways to participate in crypto. There are DAOs, there's DeFi, there are games, there's GameFi. There are many things within each specific niche. And that's just to mention one of the 7.5 trillion ways to participate. What do you think is the most important way? And for somebody if I were to try to explain this to my mom, how should I recommend to her that she get started and be able to participate?
I think this is like a new digital gold rush, right? There's going to be a sort of moment where extreme new opportunity is going to arise, and it is the future of things like governance, and it's the future of entertainment, and it's the future of finance and all that sort of stuff. So learning really is the best thing that you can do. So don't be just a consumer. So don't don't just follow crowds and buy tokens that are trending, which is a successful trade sometimes, and that kind of works. But actually dedicate some time to understanding fundamentals and understanding why this is important, and learning as much as you can, because those skill sets, there's degen traders who are probably going to be, you could get jobs for $250,000 a year salaries in the future just because they were here at this point learning about what was going on. And so I think the being here at the right time and understanding this stuff and trying to understand it on a deeper level, that's the edge, is going a little bit further down the rabbit hole than the rest of the people out there. Understanding markets a little bit deeper, understanding blockchains and how they work a little bit deeper, understanding smart contracts a little bit deeper. That's the best thing to do, I think.
I love it. Dr. Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You're the absolute man. I'm really grateful that you're in this space and tackling some of these problems. So thank you for everything that you do, and thank you for sharing the time today.
Pleasure. I absolutely enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Good man. To everybody watching and listening, thank you all. I will see you in the next